Today we're going to be covering the most important events of recent years in U.S. history, specifically during the Trump and Biden presidencies. So Donald Trump was president from 2017 to 2021. He was most known for his nationalistic style, his very brash rhetoric, and America First agenda. Trump's combative personality, his unconventional behavior were very repulsive to some and very inspiring to others. He was a polarizing figure, both domestically and globally. Some people loved him, others hated him. His words and actions were very unpredictable, and this made foreign leaders nervous, both our allies and our enemies. Trump cut taxes and regulations, and as a result of that, the economy did very well during the first 3 years of his presidency until the coronavirus came and tanked the economy and killed millions. Unemployment sank to record lows, and the stock market rose to record highs. Trump also began construction on a controversial border wall to curb illegal immigration. This was another thing that people had very strong opinions on either side of. He also appointed 3 conservative Supreme Court justices, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, all of whom voted to overturn Roe v. Wade and ban affirmative action in 2022 and 2023, respectively. In 2019, Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, and then he was acquitted by the Senate and allowed to remain in office until the end of his term. The COVID-19 pandemic was the worst pandemic in a century. It spread across the globe in 2020 and 2021. Estimates are in the millions of how many people died. The exact number is unknown, but it's certainly in the millions. Economies crashed all over the world because of shutdowns, and governments initiated lockdowns, mask mandates, and then once the vaccine was developed in late 2020, some governments instituted vaccine mandates as well. Mental health issues skyrocketed as a result of people being isolated and lonely. You have increased cases of anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation, especially among young people. And debates really raged about whether governments have the right to regulate non-criminal behavior, things like not getting vaccinated or not wearing a mask, and those debates continue to go on. There were several incidents of police brutality against African Americans in 2020, and this led to a summer of riots, led in particular by organizations like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, which in the end killed 25 people and caused $2 billion in property damage. Donald Trump faced former Vice President Joe Biden in the presidential election in November of 2020. Both men were very unpopular, but a record number of Americans voted in this election, due in part to the introduction of on-demand mail-in ballots in order to reduce COVID infections of people going to the polls. Biden narrowly defeated Trump in this election, but due to potential insecurity of mail-in ballots, as well as due to his pride and hubris, Trump claimed the election was rigged and claimed that he had won. This led to a riot that took place at the U.S. Capitol building on January the 6th of 2021, in which a group of extremist Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building in an attempt to halt the congressional election confirmation process, which was to confirm Joe Biden as the winner of the election. One protester was killed in this riot, and several policemen were injured. Trump was then impeached again by the House of Representatives for, quote, inciting an insurrection, and then was acquitted by the Senate again. So when Joe Biden entered office, he promised to, quote, lower the temperature and bring dignity back to the Oval Office and unify America again. And it's currently under debate whether or not he did that, and you can make your own opinion on that. In August of 2022, Biden gave a speech in which he said that the U.S. was in, quote, a battle for the soul of our nation. And in this speech, which you see a picture of at the top where he's at his podium and there's soldiers behind him and that kind of red background, in this speech he condemned people he called MAGA Republicans as a threat to American democracy. Domestically, his presidency was marked by high inflation. Unemployment did go down, which is great, but inflation did get quite high. The U.S. also experienced a record amount of illegal immigration. Millions of illegal migrants came across the southern border. Biden also appointed the first black woman to the Supreme Court, the third African-American total, and the first African-American woman, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Biden also made history as the oldest U.S. president in history, the only president we've had so far in his 80s. Globally, Biden's presidency was marked by a handful of international crises. First off, in 2021, there was the Afghanistan withdrawal. In August of 2021, Biden ordered the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan. This led to the deaths of 13 American soldiers, and the Taliban immediately took back over Afghanistan like it had controlled Afghanistan before the U.S. invaded in 2001. His presidency was also marked by the war between Russia and Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, and Biden very much supported Ukraine, sending billions of dollars in military aid. And then you also had the Hamas attacking Israel in 2023. On October 7th, 2023, the terrorist group Hamas, which is in control of the Gaza Strip in Palestine, attacked Israel. In fact, that was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, and Biden, to his credit, supported Israel there. Now, post-war Afghanistan has been troubling to see. From 2010 to 2021, U.S. troops were in Afghanistan, but the number of U.S. troops decreased dramatically in Afghanistan during that time. Remember, we invaded in 2001, overthrew the Taliban, and were essentially there for years afterwards in order to try to keep the country stable. By 2018, the threat of the Taliban and al-Qaeda had been minimized, but the U.S. still occupied Afghanistan for the purpose of keeping the region stable and out of the Taliban's control. Then in August of 2021, Joe Biden ordered the removal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan to officially end that war. But he ordered the troops removed before he secured the removal of all Americans and U.S. allies from Afghanistan. So when the Taliban took over, those people were then trapped, which led to an evacuation crisis in which 13 U.S. soldiers were killed and many Afghanis were killed in the process as well. Post-war Iraq, remember after the U.S. withdrew from Iraq in 2011, the terrorist group ISIS took over a lot of the country as well as a lot of Syria. And at its peak, the ISIS caliphate was about the size of Ohio. Approximately 8 million people lived under the tyranny of ISIS at one point. After fighting ISIS for years, starting in the final years of Obama's presidency and continuing into Trump's presidency, American forces liberated the last ISIS stronghold and destroyed the ISIS caliphate in March of 2019. And that's a huge victory because that means that all of the Yazidi women who were in sexual slavery were now freed, and there were no more people living under the caliphate of ISIS. Now, ISIS as a group continued to exist, but in October of that same year, 2019, American troops found and killed the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. I put a picture of the dog there. His name is Conan, and he was integral in chasing down Baghdadi before he was killed. In January of 2020, the U.S. also killed Iranian terrorist leader Qasem Soleimani. And entering the 2020s, Iraq was free and Iran was weakened, though still a threat. Today, Iraq is a parliamentary republic. It's also an ally of the U.S., which is far more than could be said of it before the Iraq War. In 2017, when Donald Trump banned travel to the U.S. from 6 Muslim-majority countries whose governments had ties to terrorist groups, Iraq was removed from that list, indicating that it was no longer a terrorist threat, no longer an enemy of the free world. Since the days of Saddam Hussein, Iraq's population has grown from 25 million to 40 million. Average household income has risen, and oil production has doubled in Iraq. Also, since the removal of ISIS from Iraq, displacements of Iraqis have been cut in half. You also have life expectancy in Iraq having risen from 67 years to 73 years. You also have access to clean water increasing in Iraq, and the literacy rate has gone from 74% to 85%. Also, civilian deaths from political violence has dropped to less than 10% of what it was during Saddam Hussein's rule, which means that the defeat of Saddam Hussein, the insurgents, and ISIS, while it came at a very great cost, have really transformed Iraq into a much better country than it used to be. Going into the 2020s, the Wuhan coronavirus pandemic, which was the worst epidemic in a century, dealt a severe blow to the global economy and killed approximately 6 million people worldwide. Debates emerged regarding health, public health, the role of the government, public safety, and individual liberties. And currently, one of the big international crises is the war in Ukraine. In February 2022, Russian leader Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, which was the first time a European country had invaded another European country in about 50 years. The Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, led the fight to defend Ukraine and received a lot of support from the U.S. China and Iran supported Russia in their invasion of Ukraine, while most of the rest of the world condemned it and sent military aid to Ukraine. The results of this war are still unknown at this time, but will likely impact the future considerably. As far as other hostile nations on Earth, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un met with Donald Trump in 2018 and 2019. This was the first time a sitting U.S. president had met with the dictator of North Korea. And they discussed potential denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Unfortunately, this has not happened yet, but it's something to keep one's eye on. Also, new trade policies emerged between the U.S. and China, and that caused shifts in the global market. Iran threatened war with the U.S. in January 2020 after we killed Qasem Soleimani, but backed down after the U.S. showed military strength. Palestinian terrorist group Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, instigating the Israel-Hamas war. Currently, the results of those war are unknown since the war is still going on. Both Trump and Biden, to their credit, labeled the atrocities against Uyghur Muslims in China as a genocide. If you're not aware of that, in the province of Xinjiang in western China, you have a group of an ethnic minority known as Uyghurs, who are mostly Chinese Muslims, essentially being exterminated. You have them being enslaved, you have them being in concentration camps, and it is by every definition a genocide, and both the Trump and Biden administrations labeled them as such. China has threatened to invade Hong Kong and Taiwan, and is certainly an emerging superpower. The intelligence community in the U.S. ranks China as the number one global threat to peace. Currently, the 2024 election looks like it will likely be a rematch between President Biden and former President Trump. That could change, but right now, that's what it looks like it will be. The U.S. government is currently $34 trillion in debt, which is hard to fathom, but that is certainly dangerous. And we are in debt to both foreign and private investors. Also, government spending continues to rise more and more every year. According to the U.S. intelligence community, the 5 global security threats are China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and basically a grab bag of jihadi groups such as the Taliban. The most controversial issues in America currently are abortion, immigration, gender ideology, education, and law enforcement, among others. And the future of these issues and of America itself remains unknown.